You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
In my experience, I would say the reason shows fail and writers fail to make pilots as strong as they could be is not knowing how to write a powerful internal story.
Hey everyone, thanks for hitting that play button for another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. Before I get to today's episode, I want to say I am very sorry about last week's upload problems. I know a few of you sent me emails that it would play for a little bit and then it would go off. I think I've got it all figured out, and that was completely my fault, so I want to apologize for that. So on this week's episode of the podcast, my guest is the writing instructor for writers on the Verge, a blogger for the Huffington Post, and she runs her own consulting agency. This is episode 118 with guest Jennifer Grisanti.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Jen, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, I've always wanted to actually have you on, Jen, because you and I have, we've talked before. I've got to work on some stuff with you, and you're always one person I always had marked down. I was like, make sure we get Jen on this podcast because she has such great information and she always puts things in such a great way.
Oh, thank you so much. I love what you're doing. This is great.
Oh, thank you, Jen.
You got it.
So, Jen, just to get started, could you just give us a little bit about your background and, how you found yourself in this crazy, wacky world we call, the TV industry?
Of course. So I went to USC and I studied cinema and communications and didn't know anyone coming out of school, didn't have any contacts. My dad's a doctor, my mom was a lawyer, and we were from a small suburb where there were no Hollywood contacts. So I went to a job employment place for people in the entertainment industry called Friedman, and the Friedman agency actually placed me. Leslie Komar, who now has her own agency, was working at Friedman then, and she placed me in the spelling office, and that really was the major start of my career. I had done some gigs in casting and in feature films before then, but I'd say the job at Spelling really catapulted my career because I was there for 15 years. Aaron Spelling was my mentor for 12 of those years. I climbed the ranks as a current programming executive and eventually ran current programming for the last 2.5 years. And then I was promoted to Vice President of Current Programs at CBS Paramount and covered shows including Medium Numbers, NCIS, The 4400, and Girlfriends. And then I started my own business, Jen Grisanti Consultancy, 8 years ago. After I went through my all is lost type moment that led me to open my own business. And since then, I've worked with over, I think, my God, we're going to be close to over 800 writers now. And I've had 40 writers sell pilots. I've had 5 go to series. I'm also the writing instructor for writers on the Verge at NBC. I've been there for 8 years now as well. And that probably catches you up. And yeah. And I've been fortunate. I've written 3 books during that time, and that brings me to the present.
See, Jen, that's why I wanted to have you on. All those stats when you were saying about how many pilots you've got helped to sell, how many people you've gotten into those meetings and stuff like that. That right there is insane numbers for, to be able to take all those writers, mold them, so to speak, and then, have them go on to sell pilots and get them staffed and writing assignments, all that good stuff.
Thank you. It's been, I think it really is a tribute to the investment, and by investment, I don't even just mean financial investment, the emotional investment, the physical investment that people make, the trust in the relationship to really take their work to the next level so that it can lead to selling the script or getting them staffed on a TV show.
So I just have to ask, what were some of the most important things or some of the things that really stand out that you learned from Aaron Spelling? Because he was your mentor, during some of your early years, and so I was wondering, what were some of the things that really stood out that he taught you?
Well, he taught me everything about story. So, I had a routine with him where I'd work in the office till 8:30 at night, and then I'd read scripts for 3 hours. And then the next day I'd go back and we'd talk about the story and what worked and what didn't work. And he really taught me everything he knew about stories. So between the script notes and then I get to see him be a master when we would do the rough cuts. A rough cut is when you get everything that was filmed on an episode and then we view it in the spelling office, and watching him be a master with the editing and rearranging of stories so that when it hits the air, it is the best possible. There was no greater school. I always say that was my master program, was working in the spelling office and then going beyond.
Oh, absolutely. That just your description of it sounds like it would be a, ultimate masterclass to be able to sit with Aaron Spelling. Because you can go down the list of TV shows that he produced or helped create in some way, which way or another. It's probably well over 100 shows, right? Oh,
he's the most prolific producer, I believe, still in TV. If I remember correctly, he had over 4,000 hours worth of television. So I don't know the exact number of shows, but I would say you're probably right, but I'd have to look into that. He is, I think it was just the timing. Like when I started with him, it was the second year of Beverly Hills 90210, and it was the original Beverly Hills 90210. And then Melrose Place, the original Melrose Place, was staffing when I started during my first week. So it actually was a really good time in his career, because after he had like 7 shows on ABC, he went through a dry spell where he had nothing on the air before 90210. And when I came into his office, 90210 started, and that led to another huge phase in his career where there were just countless programs coming out over the 12 years that I was there. So it was great. And Seventh Heaven was another huge show that had massive success when I was there, and Charmed, and then a countless number of other shows.
So when you say he taught you a lot about story, do you think that it was a lot of, was he always talking about, like key movements, like the inciting incident and, obstacles and solutions? Like, was he really into that, or was that a big part of what he taught you?
I would say, it's interesting because what you learn as a story analyst, just as a writer, is you have to learn all of the techniques and the tools, and then you're finding your own voice within it. I wouldn't say his forte was going into what you just mentioned. I would definitely say it was more going into the character moments, the character dynamics, what he believed sounded authentic to the voice of the character, act breaks that didn't work as well as they could because they didn't end on a pivotal moment that would make the audience want to come back. Not enough conflict, certainly, going into what you mentioned about obstacles. He would certainly mention that. If he didn't like the storyline, he would certainly mention that. So it was, it was a number of things, but I would say, he was definitely old school. So it was more like really moving into, this is what isn't working for me, with his notes. And then he, then I began doing all the notes, and he would review my notes. And so it really started a very nice back and forth dynamic, which had a tremendous impact on my career.
So, Jen, when you're watching TV today, and you don't have to give me a specific show, do you sometimes watch the show and mentally start giving notes like, oh my gosh, you didn't do this?
Oh, yeah, you definitely do. Now, it's fascinating because I'm preparing for, I'm teaching a master class in London for Labor Day and in New York City. And for London, I had to, I contacted them and I said, I'm breaking down a bunch of American shows, but I'd also like to know, I said, I looked up on IMDb what are the most popular shows in London. I said, but I'd love to hear from you what you think would be, 2 shows that I should break down that would be big in the London audience. And they said The Night Manager, and they said Happy Valley. So Happy Valley, I binge watched like the 6 episodes of it last night, and it was phenomenal. Like, I have to say, like, I'm usually a person who, yes, like you say, I'm constantly analyzing and figuring out how story could be stronger. And I love both of these series. I loved The Night Manager. I thought the finale was absolutely mind-blowing. And Happy Valley, I have to say, like, I think that was one of the most near perfect series that I think I've seen done to date.
It's funny. I haven't seen either one of those shows, right. But my friends always say that the 2 best shows that they have seen, recently were Banshee and Ray Donovan.
Oh, interesting. I've certainly seen. I watched Ray Donovan for a season. Banshee, I may have tried it, but I didn't stay with it. But I can't remember exactly. I mean, certainly Happy Valley is more something that is prevalent in London. It's not as prevalent here, but I definitely think it's going to become when people sink their teeth into it. Because I've spoken all over the world, I have the good fortune of getting exposed to shows like Borgen, that was the #1 show in Denmark, that was about a female prime minister and was very similar to The Good Wife. That was mind-blowing, and that was incredible. So I think, I think it's obviously all subjective. There are a number of shows that I love here. I certainly think Homeland had a phenomenal season this past season, and there's so much great work being done that House of Cards I certainly like this season, Master of None, I love Silicon Valley. So yeah, there's some really, really great work being done.
I just took the McKee seminar in New York, mm-hmm. and the reason, because I won first place in his competition, and that was part of the prize. Thank you very much. So I figured, a weekend in New York, get to hear, get to talk about screenwriting the whole weekend. Sure, I'm there. And he said, on stage, he said, the future of writing is all TV. Episodic material. He goes, I don't know how much longer, a lot of these film writers are going to be around. He said, the market, he said, is changing, even towards the near future, he was saying, as far as we can see, it's all going to be TV and episodic stuff. And I just wanted to, get your opinion. Do you think that I know we're in the gold mine of or the second TV era, so to speak, but I wanted to get your opinion, Jen. Do you feel that for the near future, and as far as we can see, do you agree that TV is just this episodic is what is going to be popular from now on in?
Well, I mean, you have to always know features will always be popular. Certainly when you look at the Oscars and everybody waits till the end of the year because they can't wait to sink their teeth into some really good stories. But I do agree with McKee in that, television has taken over in a mass way where television used to be thought of as secondary to being a feature writer. Now, a ton of top feature writers are doing television because it is becoming a medium, and I think it's also becoming a platform where incredibly talented writers do have the freedom to get their voice out there through streaming. And, when we're talking Amazon Prime and Netflix and Hulu and any number of places, I definitely think, and you could get top names who will commit to 6 episodes or 8 episodes and know that they're going to have a steady paycheck and make incredible money and have product that is going to be out there. Whereas the feature world, unless you're an entrepreneur and have access to a lot of money, it's a very difficult world to get a start in.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I also have been seeing a lot more TV pilot competitions.
Mm-hmm.
I've been seeing a lot more competitions saying, hey, we want to see what pilots you have. And you're right, with Amazon and everyone else. I mean, I've always heard rumblings that Walmart is going to get into the original content.
Interesting. It's the pilot competition. Screencraft is having one right now. So that's still, I believe, August 15th, I think is the deadline. So that one's still open. And then I know Final Draft, I believe I think their submission date passed. But they have one. And you're right. The Austin Film Festival, there are a number of great organizations that are doing pilot competitions.
So, as we're talking about all these competitions and all this, all of the new avenues that writers can explore, I wanted to ask you, Jen, why do you think that most writers fail at writing a pilot? And I don't mean, and I just mean, writing their own original pilot and whatever the idea is, and whether it's half an hour or 60 minutes, why because you work with so many writers. So I want to ask, why is it you think that so many writers fail at maybe making a pilot?
No, that's a very good question. And I have always gone into why, I can even look at why shows fail, not even just why writers fail with some pilots, why shows fail, which is in alignment with it. I think the biggest reason that that some pilots fail and shows fail is because they fail to develop the internal story and have a clear understanding of the why the character wants what they want. And I think that, in my opinion, when you look at the success of The Blacklist and Blind Spot and Homeland and The Good Wife, it all has to do with the development of the internal story that brings the audience back. And I think that writers struggle with really understanding how to create a season 1 arc based on a powerful question that will come out of the series trigger and dilemma, and then the pilot will be one step toward the answer to that question, and every other episode will be moving toward that overall answer. So in my experience, I would say the reason shows fail and writers fail to make pilots as strong as they could be is not knowing how to write a powerful internal story.
So when we watch something like Breaking Bad,
Very powerful internal story.
Oh yeah, I mean that was one show where it's funny, I didn't start watching it until I think the third or fourth season. It was in its third or fourth season, and a friend of mine got me the season 1 for my birthday, and I said, I don't really want to get into another show. I said, and Jen, I'm telling you, I was hooked from episode 1. I burned through the whole season 1, ordered season 2 and 3 on DVD or Blu-ray, and I just started watching it all. And I was like, this show is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, that was because Vince Gilligan mastered storytelling. I mean, he is a complete brilliant writer who really gets how to build and craft the internal story so that the external is elevated to a whole new level.
Yeah, because when we watch Breaking Bad and we see Walter White, it's because he always has that duality, right? Where he's trying to provide for his family, but he has to sell meth, and he believes that doing this is the right thing to do, which just leads him down this horrible, horrible road that ends up destroying everything he worked so hard for.
Yeah, he's doing a bad thing for a good reason, and it starts that way until he evolves into recognizing that the bad is something he's drawn toward. So I think watching his character evolve into that and understanding, I think it's also understanding light and dark and vice and virtue of a character, and what is the wound that's driving them, and what is the flaw that gets in the way. It's really digging deep psychologically into your character and morally into what they want and why they want it.
So, Jen, as we talk about, the internal story and what they want and why they want it, is there any sort of tips or anything that you usually give to writers to say, this is what you have to really focus on? Because I'm sure, even me, so I'm sure it's happened to you, when people ask me to read their stuff, sometimes, it looks well formatted. It looks like a script, or it looks like a TV pilot. But when the writing's pretty good, the action scenes are solid, or what have you. But when you get down into the core of it, you always seem to say to yourself, it feels like something wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the internal story that you're talking about. I think that's sort of it. So is there anything you ever talk to writers about, or any sort of tips that you use as sort of like a litmus test to say?
Yeah. I mean, I have all kinds of tools that I use in writing the internal story. I'm going to be doing seminars. The one I'm doing in New York, or the second part of the masterclass day for the pilot, writing the TV pilot, is on creating and crafting the internal story. And, I would say the biggest thing you want to think about is, if you study the series trigger and dilemma of shows like I mentioned, like Homeland, like Blind Spot, like The Blacklist, like The Good Wife. If you really, like Luther, I think has one of the most spectacular openings that I've ever seen in a pilot. Like, if you really study those openings and you understand that the series trigger and dilemma really, if it's well done, sets up the internal story for season 1 and really takes you in. So I think it's learning to recognize the internal story has a trigger, dilemma, pursuit as much as the external story, and it parallels the external story. And it's when we know, it's just like in real life, when we know what's going on inside a person and why they want what they want and what's at stake if they don't get it, then that's how you create a rooting factor, and that's how you create an audience who wants to come back to watch your show.
Yeah, very true. And it's almost like Breaking Bad, because Walter White, he starts off as this, nice, lovable chemistry teacher. And by the end, he's this, he's an anti-hero, his transformation.
Yep.
And you sort of wonder, can you still root for this guy? Is he still the same person he was? Do you find, that if someone comes to you or someone comes to a pitch seminar or a competition and their story involves an anti-hero, almost like a Tony Soprano, do you feel that might hinder their ability to
not? No. Okay. I think anti-heroes are huge right now. I think it's really, though, understanding the anti-hero is not a passive hero or a reactive hero. It is crafting a character that, even though you may not sympathize with them or like them, you empathize with them. And if you can master understanding how to empathize with that character, then the anti-hero, then you're still going to root for the anti-hero. I think some of the strongest characters written in television over the last 5 years are of anti-heroes.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point too about empathy. That's something I've learned too, is empathy, not sympathy.
Right.
Because I think some people are a little too hesitant to write a main character, sort of the hands in pockets, looking down at the ground, all gee shucks type of person, and you know what I mean. It's raining on them, and they just have the worst. But it's like, there's no connection. I mean, yeah, we feel sorry for this person, but there's really no other connection.
Yeah.
And I think that's I made the same mistake myself too. And it's using sympathy, but we should be using empathy instead of sympathy.
Yep. I totally agree.
So, Jen, I wanted to ask, is there, we were talking about Breaking Bad, we were talking about Sopranos. Is there any hidden jewel shows that you've seen over the years that maybe weren't big, they didn't get popular like a Game of Thrones or The Americans? Is there anything that you saw and you said, why wasn't it more popular than what it was?
Well, I definitely think that there are, a recent show that I think had the potential to be huge if they had just given it more time was Togetherness on HBO. I definitely feel like now the biggest challenge for shows is finding their audience quickly enough. And Togetherness, for me, had the same type of feel audience as a show like Friends, that I think the audience just didn't get there quickly enough. And I think, though, in my opinion, I just thought the show was fantastic. And that happens. There are many shows that now, when you look at a show, I spoke in Australia in 2013, and there was a show there called The Slap that was huge there. It was huge. And yet here, it didn't transfer. It didn't transfer. In the setup of that was the idea that you took one big incident at the beginning of the show, and then you spent the rest of the season going through different world views, through different character lenses of the same incident. And so it worked in Australia, but it didn't work here. And so I think it's all, creating ways to find your audience. And as I say, I think when I first started as an executive, that was 1992. Within that decade, I would say, you had shows like The Sopranos, Sex and the City, and everybody watched every episode of those shows. But now it is a different place and a different time, and we've got shows coming out. Bloodline, I love. There's certain Narcos I love. There are shows just coming out and really, grabbing you. Certainly, The Night Manager was, I think, story evolving. I think Happy Valley. I think if people could be aware of that show here. It's BBC and Netflix is mind blowing. So I do agree that part of the dilemma for many shows is they have to find their audience quick enough, because if not, they will get canceled.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jen. And, I've seen that some old properties, which were movies in the first place, were being developed into TV shows. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember the name of the one that's off the top of my head, but I remember seeing that.
MacGyver's coming back. Isn't MacGyver? CBS is doing MacGyver.
Yeah, and there was it was a movie, and I can't remember what the movie was, but they were going to make it into a TV show, and I thought to myself, wow, because they're going to hope for that built-in audience for when the show debuted.
On NBC? Maybe it's Taken on NBC. You're talking about that was a big feature.
No, it was a comedy. Oh, okay. See, I'll put it in the show notes for everybody what I'm talking about. I'll look it up. But I didn't even know Taken was going to be a show now.
Yep, it's a mid-season on NBC, and the pilot's excellent.
Oh, wow. I'll have to make sure to check that out. Because, and again, as we talk about audience too, some people are turning to the web, and they're making episodic series, for the web. And, it's funny, Jen, because I remember, even 4 or 5 years ago, people were saying, hey, don't make it too long because people don't want to see anything over, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes tops. Now, I'm seeing web series that are going, some are 5 minutes, some are 10 minutes, some are 15. Granted, they don't have the marketing machine behind them, but on the flip side, some of these don't cost, literally, they almost cost nothing to produce because they're using their houses, they're using their own stuff,
right.
and they're just putting it up there on their YouTube channel for people to find. It's almost like a really long keyword. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think first of all, the YouTube and Funny or Die, those are excellent ways. They're excellent vehicles for the writer entrepreneur to get known and to find an audience. And that's what the key to everything is right now. You can't go into anywhere where they're not going to say how many Facebook friends you have or how many Twitter followers do you have. And that's what the business is about right now. It really is about, can you find your audience? Will they come when you're working? And how is that all going to come into play?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine. He works at a distribution company, and he actually put together.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. He put together Camp Dakota,
right, for
Netflix, and Camp Dakota, nothing but Netflix stars,
right?
So they had that built-in audience, and he said when it got released, it was like the number one movie on Netflix, and I'm just waiting for somebody to come along and put together all some YouTube stars into like an episodic YouTube series. Like I'm waiting for someone like a William Morris Endeavor Agency, putting some money behind something like that, and then just letting it roll.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. Well, you have to think there is a huge value to the built-in audience. There is a tremendous value to doing that. Now, again, there's also a tremendous risk because it's like, is the climate still the climate where whatever the story is going to be is still going to resonate with people on a powerful level? So, it is certainly with everything going on in the world today. It's going to be interesting to see the stories that come out in the next, 2 to 5 years that are going to deal with the healing of what we have going on in the world right now.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And also, I know this is this isn't really episodic, but it did become a TV show, was a Twitter feed of Shit My Dad Says. Mm-hmm. That was a Twitter feed, and then all of a sudden it became a TV show. And, one of the reasons that it only lasted one season, but from what I've heard, they didn't let the person who created it, I think his name's Justin, they didn't let him into the writer's room, and so what he basically said was he would come up with ideas and he'd say, this is what my dad would actually do or say. And they said, oh yeah, well, we'll take notes on that, and basically, I think the audience expectations didn't live up to what they were supposed to be because they, and I think there was some disconnect, you know what I mean?
Yep.
In between. So I think that's what may have happened with that show.
That it does happen, but the beauty and the gift of television is that features doesn't have is that you can throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks, because that's what it's all about. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, then at least you know. So, I mean, when you look at the number of shows that get produced every season that don't make it to season 2, that's what television is. And that's part of the beauty and the gift of having a platform that is there and viable to see what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. And because I mean, sometimes I see TV shows and some of their episodes, they always have that one episode sometimes, maybe they experiment a little bit. Each TV series ends up having a bottle episode. But beyond that, I mean, there's sometimes they're allowed to experiment a little bit and maybe have some off the wall off the wall episode. Community, I think, took that to a whole nother level. Did you watch Community, Jen?
Yeah. Community was excellent.
Yeah, I think maybe season 4 where it was at its apex, and I remember, each episode was completely almost different than the last in terms of, I mean, everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you'd have some episodes were all animated, some were claymation, some. I mean, it's just really really interesting. I always like Community. I just wish they had let. Dan Harmon on more, but I know there's a whole that's a whole nother story, Jen.
It is. You're right.
So, Jen, I know we're almost out of time. I had a couple Twitter questions come in. Okay. The first one, Jen, honestly, I'm sure you're probably going to know this was going to come in, but it's basically is how do I pitch a TV series to networks?
Oh my gosh. Well,
that's a $10 million question.
I mean,
Jen.
yeah, I think, the biggest thing you do in a successful pitch, the number one thing, first of all, is setting up why you are the perfect writer to be writing this story. So it's really understanding how your emotional truth links to the concept. So that builds the idea of this is the perfect person to be telling the story, and this person has a huge well that is going to go toward the success of this show. So, that certainly is one. And then it's having a very strong concept, very strong characters, and having a formula. Certainly I have a pitch formula for pilots and spec scripts and all that. I mean, it's having a formula that really works so that you're not rambling. I mean, I think the biggest mistake that writers make is they get into their characters and they just start rambling and they lose their audience. So I think it's really knowing, like, how do you get in and get out and yet give a piece that really shows us, I mean, other than your lead, you really don't want to spend a lot of time going in depth into the characters. And then you have writers who want to tell you the whole story plot wise, rather than just teasing you with the pivotal moment. I always tell writers to think about, they want to hear you tell a story. So tell the story of your opening or tell the story of your climax. Some pivotal moment in your story that is going to entice them and bring them in and make them want to know more.
And the other question that came in, Jen, was, by the way, that was a fantastic answer, by the way.
Thanks.
But the other question that came in was, do I need a Bible before I pitch my TV show?
I recommend it. I recommend the Bible. When I started my career, Bibles used to be like 40, 50 pages, but now they're like 10 to 20 pages. So what the Bible does is it's really understanding what the Bible does for the writer before going into the pitch meeting. And what the Bible does is it prepares you for all the questions that you're going to be asked about your series. And so through doing the exercise of the Bible, you know up and down and backward and forward what you are going to be pitching. And so there's a tremendous value in that. Now I'm going to tell you, I would say the majority of the time, your Bible is not going to be what the show is, because the studio or the network is going to want to develop the show with you. But it is going to be a huge thing in selling your pitch.
Excellent. Because that's a good question, because I actually was wondering that myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, in the pre-interview we were talking too about, what we glossed over talking about a Bible. But I mean, I think that's, that is great information to have, because, you don't want to be there in a meeting and say, okay, well, can we see your Bible, or, do you have a Bible or something like that? You know what I mean? And you don't want to be there.
And I don't know that they'll ask you a lot, do you have a Bible? I think as I mentioned, I think the value of the Bible is it helps you know your show backward and forward, so that when you're asked questions, you know how to answer them. So I think if, it's rare that, and that prompts another question. A lot of people say, do you want to leave your pitch document, or whatever you have, do you want to leave it? Do you don't want to leave it? And there are two schools of thoughts on that. Some people say absolutely leave it. Others say don't. And I think that if my recommendation is only leave it if they ask you to leave it. And if they do ask you to leave it, then no. I mean, the value of it, I've heard people say, development executives have said to me, the value of it is if you have to pitch it to your boss because you believe in it, then you have the points right there so that you know how to pitch it. And the other side of that is that if there's too much information that doesn't resonate, then you run into that. So, I think it's kind of following your gut.
As usual, Jen, your information, your advice are always spot on. They're always, fantastic.
Thank you.
And before, I just want to ask, what are you working on right now? Is there any sort of seminars you have coming up that people should check out?
Yes. Well, I am working on, which I haven't, I planned on working on it a lot more this summer, but because I've been involved in getting ready for these two big story events in New York and London, I haven't had as much time. But I am going to be doing a digital course so that writers can get it at any point in time, that will go heavily into what I'm teaching in these master classes. I'm writing the TV pilot, what I teach at Writers on the Verge, what I teach in my 10-week teleseminar. I am going to be creating a digital course that goes heavily into that, and hopefully will be out sometime in the next 6 months. And then I'm speaking in New York. I'm doing a 2-day story event that is August 12th and 13th, and it's at the Hilton Midtown, and I'm very, very excited about that. Going to have 3 spectacular writers for a panel on the first day we're going to go heavily into the writer's room and what it takes to make it, mistakes writers make, what works, what doesn't work, why shows last, why they fail, and all of that. So some of what we talked about today. And then I'll have the master class on Saturday the 13th, and then I will be at the London Screenwriting Festival, Labor Day weekend for us, and I will also be doing a 1-day masterclass on writing a TV pilot that sells the day before the festival, and then I will be teaching 3 classes during the festival.
Excellent. And, everybody, I will link to all of Jen's wonderful, wonderful seminars in the show notes as well. By the way, my pleasure, Jen. By the way, I want to say it's very interesting you're coming up with your own online course as well. Yes. I think that's phenomenal.
Thank you. And actually, one last thing I forgot was I am also doing with Joey Tuccio, because you asked about pitching, we are having a pitch event online on August 20th. So that is another event that is, from what I understand, it's a 2-day event where they're going to have the opportunity to pitch to all these people on Sunday. And what I'm doing with Joey is helping prepare them for that. And his company is the Roadmap, Writers Road.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I actually it was just I got an email from Writers Roadmap a couple days ago, and I was like, oh, that's right, that's Joey's new company, Writers Roadmap.
Yeah.
But Jen, just in closing, I just want to ask, where can people find you at online?
JenGrisanti.com. So very easy.
And I will also link that in the show notes, everyone. My pleasure, Jen. I want to say thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you. You asked great questions. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much, Jen. I try. I try to make every interview as good as I can.
You do a great job. You're doing a beautiful job.
Oh, thank you, Jen. I really appreciate that. Everyone, you can find me at davebullis.com. Twitter, it is at Dave_Bullis. Jennifer Grisanti, I wish you the best, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
I do as well. Thanks so much, Dave.
Oh, anytime, Jen. Take care.
All right, you too.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.